All right. So I think we are going to get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm Danielle with Marigold, and we're so excited to be talking about CSR and social good today. I would just like to start off with a land acknowledgement. As we gather in this virtual space, we acknowledge that the ground beneath our feet is historically the home of Indigenous peoples. Marigold is based in the Halton region. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in the history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. We acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for being stewards of this traditional land. We also recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous people on this land. We also encourage you to look into your local area and the traditions of your region that you're sitting on today. And we'd also like to thank the OGs that came before us and worked to fight for legalization and this wonderful industry that we now have. So we're going to be starting off today with a panel, and then we will be going into rotating breakout rooms where we can get the chance to network and connect and learn a little bit more about each other and our social good and CSR goals and projects. So I'm going to pass things over to Katie to kick off our discussion.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. For lots of familiar faces, so thanks, friends, for coming back. And to all the new people joining us today, we created Marigold Live actually at the beginning of COVID as a way to be able to connect and network and really learn, some important industry knowledge from some amazing experts. I think this is maybe our 6th or 7th one that we've hosted, along with a bunch of other amazing networking events. So definitely subscribe. We've got a great newsletter, and we always keep people posted about cool opportunities in the space. So like Danielle mentioned, today's topic is all about CSR and social responsibility. We have 2 experts here who will introduce themselves in just a moment. We really believe in these topics for so many reasons. As you know, Marigold is a PR agency. We focus on branding, PR, and content for the cannabis and psychedelic spaces. And emerging industries, we were just talking about some of the challenges before this call, but this is another piece of the puzzle that they need to really be thinking about. And we'll dig into why it's so relevant for business and relevant for social good and impact at the end of the day. I'm going to throw to Mika. We'd love to hear about your company and what you do and your backgrounds.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Mika, and today I act as an expert on impact metrics. And I know that's a really sexy term that most people are really excited about. But if you're not, basically what that means is managing your non-financial capital, meaning your environmental capital, your social capital, in a way that helps you as a company operate very consciously in the environmental and social context in which you operate, because we know as businesses that we've really been focused on our financial capital, on our money, essentially, which is obviously an important driver of the business, but that we've been sort of thinking about it in a vacuum and not as part of this holistic, interconnected system, and we need to be doing that. I did not imagine this is where my career would lead me. In fact, when I graduated high school, I really wanted to be a voice actor for audiobooks. That is how I started, but I ended up in learning and development. So I was doing a lot of adult learning, which got me into teaching adults how to use cannabis. And after a year of really helping some, middle-aged and more elderly women navigate what cannabis could mean for them, and anything from what is THC all the way through to how to make your own suppositories. It's just some coconut oil and an IKEA ice tray. So it's super simple if we want to revisit that at the end of this call. But because I had that knowledge of what consumers were wanting, what were the different formats that made sense for different demographics. I then landed on the product innovation side and led commercialization for over 60 SKUs in various LPs. So very, very rooted in the ops and in knowing exactly how this was made and what decisions were made in terms of suppliers and how waste is managed. That's where sort of my eyes became open to some of the sustainability and also, the cultural, social challenges that we have in the industry today. And I wanted to have an impact on that, and started on my path with Apical back in 2019, and have worked with companies since then to demonstrate how understanding your environmental, social context is an advantage to your business when you think about it really strategically.
Amazing. Amazing. And you do have an amazing voice, so I could see how that path could have happened for you too.
Yeah.
Hello, what about you?
Yeah, thank you so much, you guys, for having me here. Mika is probably one of the most amazing people I've met in what she's able to do and how she portrays her message in a way that really can rally people. As we know, there is that bottom line that everyone really goes to. So kudos to Mika. She's just someone who I've looked up to for a very long time. So I just wanted to say that, and it's so good to finally see you again. As far as I go, Chief Revenue Financial Officer of Cake and Caviar, or Habitat, with the overlying picture, I think, which is the most important thing to talk about today, my end, which is a sustainable aquaponics technology that we utilize to grow cannabis and coho salmon in the same system today, which we've been heavy in R&D for the last 3.5 years. I think have a lot to share with regards to, how that impacts us all around, and what the steps that we've taken to kind of start to build out this plan that I'm going to learn more from Mika on every time I talk to her, as far as actually, creating those goals and achieving those, versus just kind of going with the flow and, oh, well, this is good, this is that. So it's something that we've been really thinking about while focusing on R&D, of course, so heavily for the last little bit, and something that, I'm excited to get into today. So.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're going to start kind of at the beginning. Mika, I'm going to throw this one over to you. Let's start with a bit of a 101. So what is the difference between CSR and social purpose? Like, what do these terms mean? And I think that would help our audience for a lot of us who are new to the topic.
That is such a good question, because we have so many acronyms. We have an alphabet soup in terms of social good as well. And so some of the common terms that you're going to hear are environmental social governance, CSR or social good. Sometimes you'll hear shared value. And all of these terms kind of mean the same thing, but ultimately they're used for different demographics. So when we hear ESG, environmental social governance, that is the technical term that investors are going to use, and they're going to want very specific metrics around how you prove your environmental and social impact. So they're going to be really focused on the non-financial capital management that I mentioned earlier. So ESG is kind of an investor-focused term, and of course, for anybody seeking out financing and trying to raise capital, they're going to be using that term as well in order to clearly communicate why do they have a positive impact environmentally and socially. Now, corporate social responsibility or social good, maybe as a concept more globally, is something that marketing departments tend to use because they're trying to communicate to their consumers in what ways are they responsible, in what ways are they acting ethically and in alignment with values. And although consumers don't always require that same level of specificity in terms of like actual metrics, they're actually coming to demand that more and more and more because they want these companies to be transparent. And so ultimately now we're looking at ESG versus CSR. Are they very different in terms of what the end goal is? No, not really. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is look at some of the big societal and planetary needs, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals are a great benchmark for that. We're trying to understand how can we speak to those needs, and then which audiences care about that. And we have both investors who care about that, and we have consumers who care about that And I'll just finish off with this last term that I mentioned, which is called shared value. And I think of that as sort of the umbrella under which ESG and CSR really live. And shared value is a concept pioneered by a very smart gentleman in the Harvard Business Review called Michael Porter. And his whole concept is that we can build a business that supports the communities in which we operate. And he points to Nespresso as a really good example of this, because they developed for the farmers who were growing their beans shared infrastructure and shared processing equipment that they could use as these independent farmers. They provided sustainability sort of training and programming. And so Nespresso supported these communities, supported these farmers, made sure that they had livelihoods, but also made coffee supply cheaper and more reliable for their business. And so shared value is about, how do we look at our ESG? How do we look at our CSR and actually make sure that every part of our supply chain is benefiting in the same way, and maybe not equally, but at least equitably. And that's how all of these things sort of come together. Hopefully that answered your question.
Super helpful. Super helpful. So, I think it's kind of fascinating that ESG is where you started mentioning investors. I don't know that everyone would always understand how many audiences you really are targeting with these practices. So could you talk a little bit about how environmental and social initiatives support profitability and support investor interest?
That's my favorite topic. Of course, I'll talk about that. And I would even love to use Habitat, with your permission, as an example, Kayla, because so two things. Firstly, let's talk about capital, because that's the biggest constraint for cannabis companies today. They need money, and we had a lot of capital come in from sort of the, and pardon me for using this term, I'm not sure if it's offensive, but like Bay Street Bros, very Wall Street heavy. They had like a very, very quick return on investment sort of in their minds. And then we had this big boom in 2019, this bubble that ultimately popped. And now cannabis companies are really struggling to access capital. But when we think about aquaponics as an agricultural method, largely, even outside of cannabis, it has a very low carbon footprint. It uses materials really wisely, in the sense that you're not constantly buying single-use things. You're maintaining systems and you're reusing all of these components. On top of that, there is a whole food security issue that we can now address, because there's fish associated with that, and they reach the end of their life cycle, and we could put very healthily raised and sustainable, because they operate in this system, food into the system as well. And I've been working very closely with a lot of impact investors. So these are companies or a collection of individuals that want to provide debt equity, or they're looking to just invest directly in the business as an investor. And when they're looking at these opportunities, they want to see like, what's your revenue model? What are your projections? But they also are asking like, what's your carbon footprint? How many kilos of food are you putting into the system? What is the percent of female owners in your business? What's the wage ratio, which is the ratio between the highest paid executive and the lowest paid employee? How many people in your company are earning a living wage, which is defined as rent being 33% of your income? And so these impact investors who do have money to spend, who are interested in exploring cannabis as an industry, will not invest, are not interested, unless you can provide this information very specifically.
Mm-hmm. And I really love that, because remember when we were chatting at the Cannabis at Work party in the fall, I had mentioned some programs that I had heard of in the industry that I thought were fairly interesting. And your point back to me was that, well, it might be a good message from a metrics perspective, and what the impact it's actually having is either negligible or challenging. And so one of the conversations we had was around recycling programs, which is a very popular a popular concept and a challenge for our industry in terms of packaging. I'm going off script, but any sort of advice for people as they consider the type of strategy they want to have, knowing they want to reach all these different audiences, what are some of the key things to be thinking about when you're planning out your strategy?
Well, it all comes down to relevance. And I think of relevance as a very simple equation, but sometimes it takes a little bit more thought to actually answer well. So relevance to your company is a matter of impact plus influence. So your impact is, where do you have an effect on others and where do others have an effect on you? We obviously have an effect in terms of packaging. Between 2018 and 2019, we produced 6.4 million kilos of plastic waste, most of which ended up in landfill. But then there's also a matter of relevance. So how far does our money, time, and energy go? And when I think about relevance as relates to packaging and recycling specifically, I don't think producers or retailers have enough influence here. They just don't. Health Canada has that influence. They've decided that packaging needs to be opaque. They've decided on smell proof. They've decided on the level of child resistance certification. They have influence. Even the municipal waste managers or people like TerraCycle, they have influence too, because they are collecting the packaging. They are mismanaging the packaging. Quick side note, about 50% of plastics are mismanaged and will end up in landfill, even though you put them in your blue bin. And they're the ones realizing revenue by selling this recycled plastic. So they certainly have influence, but do we have influence as producers and retailers? Very little. So strategically, is a recycling program something that will drive profitability? No. Is it a good marketing angle in the short term because you have your logo on the box at the retailer? Maybe, but it's also going to get cut at the first sign of distress in the company. You're going to be like, well, this recycling program isn't actually doing anything for me, which is why I definitely advocate and am working on developing systems for reuse. You know, we all know black packaging is really popular because it's sexy, but it's also not recyclable in most jurisdictions. But because it's black and because it's plastic, it's actually really well suited for reuse. So we're sending all of this packaging into landfill when it would be relatively easy to collect it, clean it, and sell it back to the LP at a discount, because it's actually not that expensive to clean and collect this packaging. So that's an initiative where we have impact and influence, and ultimately that's how I like to approach these problems with companies, and say, like, I see that you're doing this, but I don't think you have enough influence here to make this realistic for you. Let's focus on an area that actually drives profitability, instead of trying to like wave a million flags at your consumers and saying, look at me, look at me.
Amazing. Thank you. So Kayla, over to you. What were some of the things that you were thinking about when you were developing your strategies? I mean, actually, why don't we start there? Do you want to give an overview of your program, because you touched so many different areas of this dialogue?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, Habitat's a beast. I don't think a lot of people, have that full picture, and that's probably my fault as, the one doing all the marketing and things like that to get it out here. So I'm excited to talk about it today. But I mean, there is so many nuances to the system that have to consider everything that Mika's speaking of. And, because it's an extravagant system, we do have to have that throughput in terms of profitability, in terms of actual influence, things like that, because we're not trying to just build the next exciting, sustainable system we can go public with and then die in a year. So that's the last thing we really want to do. And aquaponics has had a really tough go. I think in, just the history of agriculture, in the last couple decades, there's been a lot of amazing people trying to bring this, this technology to fruition. Ultimately, it was never economically viable. So again, all those efforts that Mika's talking about to create something that inhabits a lot more pun intended, a lot more of the things of a business that we should than just profitability. It ultimately lived and died on profitability. And that's because we all need money to live in this world. So for us, that was a really cool challenge that we did want to come forth with. We had some expertise. Justin Henry, who is our director of aquaculture, we call him Legend. He's known worldwide for his aquaculture, contributions to the world in terms of engineering, systems, science, etc. Very specifically related to salmon for the most part, as well as sturgeon. But ultimately, the whole system came together with a lot of those thoughts in mind. So, okay, we're going to do this system. First of all, we need a hell of a lot of money. That's fun to do after the whole boom or the crash of 2019 for sure. But it really came down to what species are we growing? How are we going to be growing it? What is the box that we're putting it in? And then what's the output on the other side, on the plant side too? Because we didn't just want to be another cannabis brand, and we didn't want to be another fluffy one either. So we've been working really hard to make sure that both outputs, so just for everybody online who doesn't know, Habitat operates, Cake and Caviar operates in Habitat's technology, which is an aquaponics, organic certified aquaponics system that grows organic coho salmon and organic cannabis in the same system together. There's no break off. There's not water just going into, cocoa or anything else, any soils on the other side. It's water to water with a mineralization step created in the middle to very much harness all of the nutrients without adding anything into it. So it's very hard to do. What my team does is wild. So I always have to give them the props, but to that point, it really came down to, with the fish, we chose coho salmon. Coho salmon is a species of salmon that have been eroding for the last 10, 20 years due to logging roads, dams being built, destroying those spawning streams. And we have some of the most pristine spawning streams in the world. To see those literally digress by 95+%, that was a really big thing for us, was to create almost a hub that we create as an incubator to actually brood these women back into the system, naturally, effectively, and socially responsibly. So working with First Nations to build those back up was something that was very much at the height of our excitement in bringing this species online in our system. That's now coming to fruition. We are now in big talks with certain folks in the area to start to build out those actual systems to put those eggs back in the system. So that's a really exciting side. And then of course it comes down to the actual efficiency and sustainability of the system. So that system drives 99.7% of water recycling on the aquaculture side. We've created our own nutrient profile based on the waste from the salmon. So of course, salmon poop, they create microbes. Those microbes create ammonia, and that ammonia turns into nitrates with that beautiful process, the bubbling and toiling process that we know in nature. So there's definitely a lot going on, and with kind of three aspects of the system that we really wanted to make sure worked well, each species being grown, and then the actual sustainability of it from a water perspective, which we all know is one of the most gnarly things about growing cannabis in our world, in our industry. So those are really the things that we've been pushing forward on. This is a small overview.
Amazing. Thank you. I want to jump to talking about employee retention. So we know that we've seen stats. So for example, Deloitte did a 2021 study on millennials and Gen Z. And the stats they shared was that an estimated 44% of millennials and 49% of Gen Zers rely on their personal ethics in determining the type of work and companies they want to join. And so maybe we could start with you, Kayla, and then go to Mika. But what have you noticed, Kayla, with your team? What do these programs, how do they impact their perception of the company and also their loyalty and retention?
I think it's a game changer. We've literally had the littlest turnover ever. Our co-founder and his girlfriend, Kyra and Lane, amazing folks. They went on to build their own deep water culture system because to double the impact, really. So they took that and they built their own down in Oliver, another micro that's great to check out. Always have to shout them out. They're amazing people. But other than that, we've really had the entire crew. I went to Valens to learn lots and come back. So that retention's been huge when you believe in what you're doing. And I think for a lot of us too, none of us are making great money at this yet. So it also shows that, when we are, tight for cash these last few years and everyone's really honing in to create the future of this. And when they're taking, ultimately a pay cut from where they could be, marketed to go to, that I think that tells you a lot about who's around too. So our retention, as far as, we've had kind of 10 to 13 employees over the last 4 years. And I bet you 8 to 9 of those are the same ones that we started with. So it really makes a difference, and including them in those conversations, understanding that by this tweak, this creates that. And, when there's real purpose behind everything that you do, as we all know, it makes it a lot easier to get up in the morning and even do the mundane tasks that we all hate to do. So being able to kind of build that, and I credit that to, my ops, team CEO Rudy Shibo and Nikki Tisnati. Nikki manages the operations, and just what she's been able to do to involve everybody and ensure that level of transparency on why we're here and what we're doing is, ultimately being talked about at every, break that they can. I credit that to them, and then I get to boast about it. So
amazing. And then Mika, what have you noticed from your experience?
Well, I'll start by saying that I left 2 corporate jobs because I was too much in conflict with my own values in doing that work. And the mental health cost to me was really difficult to deal with. And even as an entrepreneur, and it's really hard. And sometimes I'm like, this is a house of cards. What's happening? I still feel better, more secure, safer, just in my own body and my own self, because I know that I'm acting in alignment with my purpose. But that's more anecdotal. If I think about it more strategically and from a statistics perspective, and this relates purely back to bottom line, right? In terms of our profitability, when you have turnover, whether that's voluntary or involuntary, just the cost of switching over an employee in terms of HR administrative time, all of those different things that actually are cash costs, that's 150% of the employee's annual salary. So if you lose somebody, that costs you money. And that does not even come down to what is the loss of productivity that you have in switching over, because someone who is leaving, their productivity declines, and someone who is arriving, their productivity starts very low and increases. So we've got 150% of your salary plus the loss of productivity that happens as part of that cycle. So it pays to keep your employees, and purpose and feeling like in alignment with your values is obviously a huge contributor to that. Absolutely is. What I think is probably under recognized in the cannabis space is also how leadership affects your desire and ability to find purpose in an organization. You can work for a company that has a stated purpose that you agree with. But then if you're working with a manager who undermines you, who doesn't respect your perspective, who sees you as just a worker bee as opposed to an asset, you're going to become disengaged. And that is also a cost to your business ultimately. So disengaged employees, which, by the way, in millennials, that amount is about 60% of employees overall. So like a majority, they will actively undermine business operations in minor ways, but many times. And so they'll, not respond or take some time or not look at an opportunity thoroughly because they just don't care and they don't feel like they're going to be recognized for the work that they do. And frankly, that cost is incalculable in terms of what we lose when we have a disengaged employee. And so thinking about leadership in cannabis as leadership who isn't top down, who isn't saying, this is how I want it to be done, execute in this way, but a leader who says, what do you think as someone who has been doing this? And then here's my perspective. How do we add that into what you think? And being more collaborative in that approach, being inclusive, being a thoughtful leader, providing a psychologically safe space for people to show up authentically, even if that means that that day they have to be human and maybe are not operating at their best. And as a leader, caring about that and understanding that we are professionals, but we're all also people. That's a huge part of engagement and ultimately ultimately retention that is kind of swept under the rug in cannabis with the leaders that we currently have in the space. And I want to just specifically call out that there are a few people who are amazing and do really wonderful work. And Kayla, I think, numbers among those individuals, but you really have to go out and find them. And especially when I talk to job seekers about how they should go about that, it's a matter of like, well, listen, you gotta dance a little bit before you take a job, because you really want to see like how this person responds to you.
Yeah.
And so Kayla, when you were developing your strategy, it's like you've got all these amazing pieces. Where did you start? Like, what were the key factors that you started with when you were determining what type of company and your values and what you were going to represent?
Yeah, I think it was extremely overwhelming, because I think that by also taking on this type of system, there's an expectation that everything needs to be dialed in term and thought of. So it was an overwhelming kind of place for us to be for a while, but it really came down to, and it's funny because this is all self-taught. We're all kind of in this startup world together. So hearing Mika talk about kind of that processes and like the whole, the influence thing is kind of the biggest thing. Like you just have to accept and calculate the fact that you doing this is not going to be important enough, and to focus those efforts on something else and letting that transcend versus trying to touch everything all at once. So for us, it really came down to that water retention and being able to have a sustainable operation internally. It came down to switching up our mothering program and our breeding program, as well as our processors, to ensure that we had the lowest footprint in terms of where we're at. Thank goodness, we had Avant bring up a facility at Tumbleweed Farms, it's called, right down the road from us. It's tough to make that transition when you're, already in the groove with folks, but you have to do it. And so now, we drive our product ourselves down to the road to that processing facility and get that done. As far as, we always knew we wanted to have that social impact in terms of the agriculture side of things. We have 600 acres on one of the most beautiful areas of the Shuswap, where we have many farming neighbors and many neighboring First Nations communities that we can do good work with. So, it was getting those salmon to our favorite First Nations resort, which is Quiet Lodge, and making sure it's on their menu before anybody else's, and making sure that we're nourishing, basically being kind and nourishing just the land, the mines, and the communities around us. That's really what Habitat stands for. So whatever we could do to do that is kind of how it started. But yeah, I think it really, we kind of gave up on packaging. We couldn't afford to put up the capital to create a sustainable solution for ourselves at that time. Is it still on our top of mind? 110%. Do I want to change from black packaging now that I know that? Yes, I do. But it's all those things that, giving yourself the grace period to start to be able to implement those things when you have the time and capacity for it. I think that was another thing that we just started right off the hop, where to the leadership point, we're getting demands, or we're giving demands that I don't think we even realized how much they were. This whole really coming forth with social impact and things like that, and CSR and all these types of initiatives in the company. That's the other thing too that leaders often forget. It's not a quick implementation. These are massive, influential veins in a company and a community and an economy that we have to take very seriously. So when those things are put into action, we need to make sure we have the capacity to do it, because down to that point of influence, whether you had the influence on the front end but didn't execute it properly, then you don't have the influence on the out end. So there's kind of two sides of that. So for us, it really came down to that water consumption, no waste in the system, and then what are we going to do with these salmon and also the cannabis, of course. But it's the first. Also, just moving away from the certifications and the I call them the participation awards. All of these different certifications of, organic ways of being or things like that. Really make sure that you're only going for the ones that you can actually stand behind. Because I'll tell you, It may convince 5% of consumers to buy your product because you've got this or you've got that certification. But the investor that wants to invest into your company that you're playing that plot to doesn't give a flying F about that thing. He knows, or she knows, they know that is a difference of opinion in terms of actually creating impact and sustainability versus it is. So for us, I think that's also very important. Don't just be going for everything. Go behind something that's tried and true, or that you know you can do effectively, and kind of go from there.
Lots of great information. Lots of great information.
Lots to say today. It's wild.
No, it's great. And I think it's actually fascinating that the category that we've talked so little about is around brand reputation and consumer impact. So that was interesting that you just brought that up, and the notion of, the shared value system, and starting with the impact on profitability and all of those pieces. Can we talk a little bit about what it would mean to design a program that aligns with your brand values and aligns with your brand? Because I think when you see companies reaching too far, especially when they're using it as a social good platform, and it's a bit more perhaps of a marketing play than the strategic approach you guys have been speaking about today. What does that look like? Mika, what are the things that organizations should be thinking about when they're thinking about a cause that would best align with the brand?
Can I swear really quick? Just I don't know.
Go ahead.
I would start with actually giving a shit. And just let's begin there. Because ultimately what we see with some of these social good campaigns, and I'm going to use that in quotations, is that some LP, some corporate entity ends up telling a group of people what they need, instead of going, group of people, what do you need? What would make you successful? And so ultimately, the foundation of a good CSR, social good program is dialogue, which just doesn't happen for the most part. And then that comes back to, and the broader context is stakeholder capitalism. So we as a business culture have been focused on the shareholder for decades. We think of this person who never shows up to work and who may never even consume the product as the ultimate person that we are beholden to. And so stakeholder capitalism essentially says, well, shareholders are one stakeholder, consumers are another stakeholder, but we also have all these other stakeholders in terms of our environment or in terms of our communities that we have an impact on them, and we need to consider their needs. And I advocate that every cannabis company has 3 essential stakeholders that if they're not on their list, they're not really thinking about this broadly enough. And of course, they'll have more, but every producer, every retailer should have these 3 stakeholders on their list. And that is medical cannabis patients, because without them, we wouldn't have this industry. And furthermore, they end up shopping in the recreational markets because that's where they get the best quality medicine for themselves. We have Indigenous communities, and we have Black and brown people, especially business owners. And these 3 groups need our attention as an industry. And when we see programs that are meant to engage these individuals and businesses in these communities, again, that dialogue is one way. You need this, says the white-owned corporate entity, as opposed to, I realize that I have an effect on you and have had an effect on you through prohibition, through legalization. What would make your participation in this space easier? What would help your community accumulate generational wealth? Okay, let me see how I, as a business, strategically and in my operational context, can support that. That is the foundation of a good social responsibility program.
Amazing. Thank you.
Well said.
Kayla, any advice for people considering how to choose a cause or choose initiatives that align with their brand and their values?
Yeah, I think as I kind of ranted about earlier, but it really, I think the one foot in front of the other is a really good way to do it. I think it's a beast. And I think a lot of people do feel a lot of pressure to do all the things. Just do one little thing and make that stepping block for the next. And before you know it, you have a list of things that you're actually doing and you're living and you're breathing, and it shows through your employee retention, or it shows through your team's excitement. Our master grower, Ryan Rinsma, who is just a phenomenal dude, even just watching him build his knowledge of the fish side of things, being an amazing grower for decades and processor and things like that. But this obviously being a new thing. And you can almost watch, and I hope he doesn't hate that I'm saying this, but you can almost watch his passion for that fish side really come out over the last, 6 months. I've seen him posting just the fishies because he has so much excitement for what those fishies bring to our system, because he gets to see the fruits of those labors in his side of the operation, being the cannabis. Those moments will let you know what's happening right. I think when you have that, just and that having that awareness. So I think my advice is getting off the whole what you think you should be doing and get on what you can do. And talking to people like Mika who can give perspective on that. Because, I'm going to be honest, I was Googling different acronyms and stuff before coming onto this call, and I'm still taking notes because I always learn from Mika and she's the best. And that's part of it too, the humility of knowing that this is a moving target in terms of what our world needs, in terms of what your business needs, and in terms of what the industry is going to allow, in terms of the red tape and the financial constrictions that we're all kind of seeing. I think right now we're seeing it through the layoffs and stuff. It's hard times, so nobody's expecting the world of you. So I think that really just starting with those small little things, because once you feel that what I'm saying, like when I saw, the stories getting more and more potent of our crew, and then seeing them all on Instagram posting it, those are the moments that you live for, I think. And I think we forget that it's just as much fun and rewarding as it is replenishing. So I think, again, just starting small. It's a small little change that moves to a next little change. I think, but well, you can't see it, but on my phone, it's, small progress is progress. For me, that's it right now, because I've always bitten off more than I can chew, or I've always thought concepts are above me, to implement and actually execute on, because we're so busy these days. So it's, again, just being humble and remembering that just the smallest little things will lead to the next thing, and just having a really clear path on that. I think that's
For sure.
in general, but
it's one layer onto that.
Please.
I mean to cut you off, but I think starting small and just like acknowledging with humility that there are things that you don't know, that is progress, right? If you have looked at your stakeholders and you're like, wow, you know what? I haven't actually talked to someone in this group and I don't understand what their challenges are. Maybe I should do that. That's progress. Like, that is the beginning of that journey. And for my journey and the beginning of me understanding what was needed, I spent 2 years listening to people before I made a single recommendation. And so that's progress too. And I just want to acknowledge a lot of that work that happens, and then choose one thing. Like you said, Kayla, that's so important. If you have too many options, you're not going to make progress on any of them.
No. And that's the other thing too, is that there is a heightened sensitivity on who or what you're doing to help. It's just like, in a sense of disappointing people, whether they've already been disappointed, whether it's your staff, whether it's First Nations around you. If you're taking on that initiative, you've got to execute it. That's your duty, to execute on it. So, you can't take that lightly. So it's not something that you just rush into with all the excitement and you see an opportunity to do it and do it. Man, my Italian hands through this whole COVID thing are just, it's all I see. It's so funny. But it's weird seeing yourself, yeah. Anyway, it never gets old these days. But yeah, we take that very seriously. That's why, we've really waited to hone in on breeding and genetics and fish, with that kind of thing, before getting involved with the First Nations community to make this, replenishment back into the streams. That kind of stuff. It's scary business, because you never want to disappoint, and you want to do right by everybody involved and make sure everyone gets, not just, not just, money, not just, resources, whatever it is that somebody needs, you want to make sure that you get it all done well. So to that point, yeah, it's just, it's the small things that add it all up, and just being humble and knowing that there's still more to learn, and making sure you're you're in these initiatives with people that know that. If you humbly admit that this is a new thing to you, and you're really, you're really trying to go for it, but you're hesitant on it, that humanity aspect is the whole thing, I think. Hey, Mika, and it's a move forward. As Danielle just said, practice makes progress. It's all we can do, but without even lifting up the pen or just acting like we know what needs to happen and working in our own worlds to do what needs to be done in the rest of the world, that doesn't work. So I stand by everything Mika says, for sure.
So that's some great advice. Think, you can think big, but take a first small step if you're just taking a step. I was reading online, some of the initiatives can fall into kind of different categories like environmental, philanthropic, ethical, economic responsibility. So there's lots of different ways that you can find that shared value. And, I love the notion of considering the profitability and having it very integrated into your business versus just a one-off marketing play. But of course, Marigold, we do a lot of PR, and we do know that, and we've worked with companies before cannabis and during cannabis that have CSR initiatives, and it definitely moves the needle. And it moves the needle in terms of positive business reputation overall, as long as you deliver, because you're right, there is that risk of tooting your own horn and then not delivering at the end of the day. And that's a bigger challenge than you want to find yourself in. So baby steps. I'd love to kind of throw out to my team a little bit, give them a bit of a shout out. An example of our core values, we really support women in the space and women in the industry. And the way we've been able to do that and demonstrate that is through, we've created speaking opportunities for over 300 women at events that we've created locally, in person, virtual events like this, at a conference that we also host each year called the Women Wellness and Cannabis Conference. And for us, that has been something we've evolved over time, and we've grown over time. It means something to us. It's real. The vast majority of our team are women. We're all women right now. And for Bridget and I, our background really informed that. We knew that was important to us. And then seeing the need in the cannabis space where we represented such a small portion, and then an even smaller portion at the leadership level, that was an initiative that we felt we could take on. And if supporting a certain group is of value to you, that is definitely something you can start small and make those baby steps while evaluating your impact. And I would say from a business perspective, of course, networking is important. And I think, authentic networking is the most important. So that's really worked out for us, and just an idea as to how you can start small and how you can start to create these little touch points that are really relevant. Mika, is there anyone that you would want to shout out to in the industry? Anyone that has been doing some great work that you think deserves a mention?
Well, I would say, generally speaking, in terms of environmental impact, aquaponics is one of the most eco-friendly in terms of carbon footprint agricultural methods out there today. And on top of that, when we think about the fertilizers that are used as part of that system, we are now no longer dependent on salt-based chemicals. We are not dependent on geopolitically unstable countries to provide those materials. And so definitely Habitat absolutely is on my list of companies that I support. And now that I'm in BC temporarily, I'm buying up as much as I can and taking it home to Ontario because I can't get it. The other thing that I would mention is thinking about living soil. So aquaponics is great in the indoor sense, but ultimately there is also this whole aspect of growing in the ground, and cannabis as a plant is a great remediator. It actually nourishes the soil as it's growing, and it can pull out some really harmful things as well, including like radioactive components. So when we think also about cannabis that's raised outdoors in living soil that promotes biodiversity, has a plethora of mycelia or mushroom and as well as other insects that live in the soil. Those are companies that you're going to want to support, but ultimately always asking the question of, are you measuring any of these things? How do you know? How can you communicate to me as a consumer what you're doing? And as a consumer, if you want to know what questions to ask, there's a great database called the IRIS Impact Metric Database, IRIS. It's globally for pretty much every industry, but you can get a sense of what questions you should be asking if you want to get sort of apples to apples quantifiable info from some of the people that you buy weed from.
Thank you. So we covered a lot today. Some of the key takeaways, CSR can offer better brand recognition and positive reputation. It can increase customer and employee loyalty. There's operational cost savings involved, which leads to better financial performance, a greater ability to attract talent and create these meaningful experiences. And then, of course, where we started, access to capital and relevancy to investors. So lots of really important audiences that you can be tackling, approaching these pieces correctly. I'd like to open it up to some Q&A. I'm popping my chat open here, and there's, I believe Danielle, do we have the Q&A function running, or should we just pop them in the chat?
In the chat for today, please.
Perfect. So yes, if anyone has any questions.
If people want to get really fun, you can throw on your video and ask in person.
Yes.
Someone asked if there's a place to vet dispensaries.
I'm certainly not aware of one, but also I want to sort of caution about vetting dispensaries, because ultimately, when you are a retailer, 98% of your impact is completely out of your control as the end distribution point. So definitely you want to be supporting retailers that are female owned or Indigenous owned or Black owned, because we want more of that ownership, but especially in terms of environmental impact, that's just not something that retailers have a lot of control over right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I say the best way to vet. Sorry,
go ahead.
I say the best way to vet is just to go actually, the most you can do as an impactful consumer would be to actually go and check out every dispensary that you can and make your own, understanding of what that dispensary is, what they stand for. And then always leaving compassionately. I think the whole thing that we do is everyone, it's a big cancel culture, and, we all want to really put all of our eggs in one basket, but we really don't know everyone's story. So, tune into, I hate to go here, Italian witch moment maybe, but just tune into the environment that you're in. Does it feel hostile? Does it feel, just whatever you're feeling in that moment, understand that and accept that, and then you can kind of make your own judgments. I think a lot of us rely on other people to tell us what we should do, and or take another person's understanding of something as our own, when I think the most impactful way you can do it is to go experience it yourself, because you might be giving a dispensary life that maybe someone else had to actually take it away.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting, Mika, having so much of the impact out of your control. What's that 2%? What do you believe is left? Is it about activating your community? Is it about being relevant to the local piece? What would you advise?
For retailers themselves, that 2% impact that they do have is on their own operations. So thinking about how much energy do they use, how much waste do they produce, but ultimately energy consumption at the retail level is going to be about your lighting and how much you use the air conditioning, and compared to a manufacturing facility is really, really negligible. But then yes, there's impact in terms of waste mitigation. So as a retailer, are you collecting packaging? Maybe even though right now you don't know where it's going, are you trying to collect? Are you featuring local artists in your store? Are you compensating them for their time and their effort? So that 2% is, there are different ways that retailers can absolutely have an impact, and that's going to be in making their stores more energy efficient in terms of lighting and air conditioning, but also making sure that their community has a space to showcase their kind of local flavor and give them a space to demonstrate who they are authentically. That's the impact that remains in the control of the retailer. But I think Kayla is absolutely correct that not every retailer and what they are trying to do in terms of community impact is going to speak to you. And as a consumer, it's our responsibility to decide what's important to us, what are we prioritizing, and then choose who we want to support with our dollars based on that. And something that I typically do is I will go into retailers and I'll go in a few times over a few months and I'll try and see, like, how do these retailers sell to me?
Mhm.
And I find that I tend not to revisit retailers that are focused on price and THC. And I'll say, I'm looking for something really mild and I like smoking quite a bit during the day. And they're, well, I have this great thing. It's 30% THC. And I'm like, that's not at all what I asked for. And so that's not a place where, as Kayla was mentioning, like, I feel safe, that I feel like my needs are being listened to and heard and seen. And so that's impact, right? That's in terms of how that community feels, which is me.
And if I can interject really quick on that, Mika, to go further on that, by you shutting down those conversations that don't resonate to you and not supporting those dialogues, it's up to the retailer, it's up to us in general in this industry to speak to a consumer base and gain understanding of their needs. By Mika walking away from that conversation or that sale based on how they approached it, whether it's that, over 30%, whatever, you're now removing that narrative from what the government bodies are now buying based on, and you're now allowing us to push our products in a way that's less, scrutinous, in a way that doesn't make sense, i.e. I need to produce, i.e. my fish need to poop so much goodness that I got to get 29% out of this, THC flower to sell. It's like, my fish have worked hard, take it up with them, I don't want it to be 29% either. But, when the whole government scheme is buying based on that as a really, apparently a very in-depth, or a very heavily weighted variable, it puts a lot of us at the cost of another pun, dead in the water with what we can provide the community and what they need versus what a certain amount of people are looking for. Right. So yeah, sorry.
And Anne-Marie posted in the chat here, hi Anne-Marie, that some retailers will have a community impact statement on their website. Beautiful. So that's another way to take a look. I wish I could remember the name of the retailer I was in. We were on a tour and they were an independent store with the most independent vibe, but the stuff they were doing for the community was very sweet and really touching. Like, one of the things is there is a man in the area, and he's sort of he's a homeless guy. He's lived around there and been around for years. He's kind of famous. People love him and they know him, and he's got a lot of relationships in that community. And he writes poetry, and so they sell his poetry, and the money goes directly to support this guy that's become so important in this community, and that matters to the people who are shopping there and the people who come there. And so it was cash only, but the one person in our group that had cash bought a few of them, and that was really nice. We do see, I'm talking some of these smaller steps that some of, everyone here is trying to manage all these things. And so some of the smaller steps we can be taking include things like that, like the art, which is amazing, being able to showcase local artists, even leveraging your space to support some of the groups that Mika mentioned earlier, and bringing the community together. And you can look to other industries to a certain extent. I mean, because of marketing regulations, when you're thinking about your message to the community or the consumer, there are still things to think about as a cannabis brand. But, there are lots of ways to make an impact, especially if you are a local retailer and you're talking a 3 to 5 kilometer radius around your store. Like, having the mindset around what can I do for this community is going to definitely go a long way. Oh, I love this from Amber that they publish an annual community report to help educate stakeholders. That must be so fantastic as your stores pop up across the country, Amber, to have that education available.
Seriously, that's a huge move. Big move.
Especially in terms of not just saying like, we're committed to doing this thing, which is what we see a lot of people do, but to say we're committed to doing this thing. And so here are the results that we achieved as a result of our commitment, and using some of those impact metrics in order to describe how exactly the community has benefited. And I just wanted to point out that in terms of like cannabis stores and how they can have a community impact, you can partner with other small businesses in your neighborhood. So maybe that means that you partner with the coffee shop next door and have some sort of cross promotional activity, or you're working with like the silk screen printer, at the other end of the block, and having some like limited edition, homeless guy merch or whatever, poetry merch, whatever it is. Those are ways where you can, as a retailer, be supporting other businesses, be supporting other people in your community, and that absolutely has a tangible impact.
Amen. Also on that note, shout out to Wizwon at WIZWON. He's our artist for all of our cake and caviar decals that you guys see for the strain arts and everything on the website. And we're just blown away by his talent. He's a graffiti artist, tattoo artist, and ultimately just artist in general. But Métis out of Saskatchewan, but an unbelievable dude. Go check out his work. It's life-changing to see it.
Shout out. Amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so, at the end of the day, I think what we're all kind of saying and what we're imparting is that regardless of the size of the company or where you're at, there are opportunities to integrate these pieces into your thinking, into your execution, and into your impact. And, the laundry list of stakeholders who have interest in your CSR and social good programs is just too important for business to be ignoring. And so I think that's really motivational and kind of exciting. And thank you so much, Mika and Kayla, for sharing all of your amazing insights. You're both so smart. I'm going to throw to Danielle.
Sorry, just 1 second, because I want to quickly acknowledge Kayla, and it was her birthday yesterday.
Oh, you would.
Happy birthday.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Yeah.
That's so nice.
I'm happy. The 30s are really going well. So I'm celebrating every year in my 30s, I think. So yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Love it. Appreciate you guys. Cool.
Cool. So we're switching things up a little bit. Over to you, Danielle, for the networking.
Yes. So thank you for that great conversation. Also, I know we mentioned 420 already in the report they're doing, but they also had a great community cleanup that they did for Earth Day, which looks like it was lots of fun. So there's lots of things that you can be doing ad hoc in your community as well. And the note about working with other local businesses too. I threw Supra in the chat, but I know their burger phone and their pizza phone and all the things that they do, they really make sure that they're like super tight in their community as well, which is nice to see. Great. So we did have a few people leave us, so we can do one more round of breakout room, or we can chat here if anybody has a preference.
I think team group
chat. All right.
I want to see everybody.
So does everyone know Owen Smith? Because I just learned all about him.
Let's hear about him.
Let's hear Owen.
Hi, Owen.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Owen.
Nice to meet everybody doing the really good work that needs to happen. Yes.
Amen.
We were just talking about how the narrative on cannabis has drifted away from what we used to hear about in the news a lot, court cases like mine, and people fighting for medical rights, to stuff like closures of facilities, laying off hundreds of workers like we saw with Canopy just yesterday. And the narrative that cannabis consumers want to hear is that they're companies they support are doing good things. And And so there's an absolute transfer. I was speaking at 420 in Victoria on the front steps of the BC Parliament last week to a crowd, and I said this, and I got a big roar. Everybody agrees. They care about. They want, tell them go and talk to your bud tenders and tell them to tell the producers this is what you care about. But this is sort of the change in the feeling around the cannabis industry, I think, can come through this work.
Just so everybody knows, Owen was part of a really famous Supreme Court case that was responsible for making edibles legal. What year was that? 2016 or earlier, Owen?
Yeah, I was arrested in 2009 making oils. And in 2015, we finished the 6 years at the Supreme Court of Canada, where they forced the government to change the law right away. And it was declared no force in effect. The previous arbitrary distinctions were dropped. And so everybody could make at home that whatever they want, and they still can if they have a medical license. There's no restrictions on concentration. But the government brought in after this a new set of regulations that did restrict the strength of cannabis oils, which wasn't anything that had been set up in the trial. In fact, the issue had been brought up that they couldn't support a limit to 10 milligrams. So we're still pushing to raise that limit. And today I was in a call with Health Canada to talk about an exemption process that the VCBC, as the club that I was working with, is hopefully going to get an exemption to start to at least offer some change. I mean, we'd hope that it would be spread to all of the industry.
Right.
But you just got to do what you got to do for the patient group that you're supporting. And here in Victoria, there's about 5,000 patients that are supported by this club. So.
Wow.
I saw that news today.
It's hard to go legal, as much as we'd love to go legal and be compliant. So it's constitutional, and that can be held up to the charter. So
yeah, definitely missed the mark on many facets of that. And I was just literally chatting to a podcast about that, Owen, about how, what aspects of the mark were missed. And thank you for all of your work and your commitment. That I get goosebumps every time I meet folks like you who have really taken it upon themselves, not only for personal gain, but for the gain of the nation in terms of getting access to this important thing. So,
well, if you want to hear more about it, I was just telling Katie and Haley in the breakout room that I'm writing a book, and
perfect.
Well, hopefully that'll help to teach a little bit about the background of the passion and the heart of how we got cannabis to where it is, and maybe inspire more people to put in that heart to keep moving the needle.
I love that you said that word too, because we've got Sydney down there. I was in her breakout room. That she's from Inspired Cannabis out in Ontario. They've got dispensaries all over the nation, but yeah, I love the Inspired has definitely been I think the theme of the call, ladies, which I think is pretty cool that you were able to build a place for us to have these conversations. So kudos to Marigold for putting this together. I saw there was at least 30 people on there the entire time, and that's huge for a one-off thing when we're all going to be going away from this with new things to support. And Owen, let us know how to reach you, and let us know when that book is going to be done, because we'll be doing everything on our end to push that.
I put a link to my LinkedIn page, which I'm using a lot more these days, in the chat. So follow me, and I'll continue to share whatever we're up to and whatever I see.
Lovely. Beautiful.
Awesome.
We have just a couple more minutes if anyone wants to say anything or share anything. It's been great to meet so many of you.
Are we going to be seeing anybody this spring at any of the events? Lyft, Cannabis, anything like that?
Yeah. I just booked my flight out to Lyft, first time in a couple of years.
Yay.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
Yeah, Lyft, Cannabis. It's going to be a good time.
You know it. When is the Cannabis one?
June, yeah,
June?
1st through 3rd.
Okay.
And then Grow Up, also by the Cannabis team, is happening in Victoria, June 20th to 22nd for all of our
No, that one was
West Coasters. Yeah. It's gonna be fun. We were at the Niagara one in the fall, which was amazing, and we're looking
Yeah.
forward to that again, because always nice seeing all the growing stuff. I don't have
Oh,
a green
sure.
thumb, so I love talking to the people that do.
There you go.
My gosh.
Interesting how taking these conversations offline and into in person, and just again relating to people as human beings and not as just like a little Zoom window, just has the potential to improve the quality of your relationships. So you know, I have this advisor, he's like, are you talking business on this trip? And I'm like, no, I'm just talking to people as human beings, and I'll talk to them about business when I get home. But like, it's having those opportunities to just connect with other humans and understand like what is motivating them and what is driving their success. That is the biggest part of these conferences for me.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Agreed.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And thank you, Kayla and Mika, for sharing. Definitely, I also made lots of notes, and we'll be talking about
Always
it
making
after,
notes
too.
with Mika. It's funny.
Yeah.
You put me on as a panelist and I'm just like sitting here. I get like my pen was in my hand. I'm like, oh, not happening. But that's the beauty of it. There's always work to be done. And I love being in these sessions to push that. We need it.
Always
Yeah.
more to learn.
Yeah.
We'll have the recording after the fact too.
Perfect.
So that'll be up shortly. And we always get about 50%. That's kind of the math on these events, registration versus turnout. So we send that out to the full list of all the people that were interested in the topic. So you may have people picking your brain that you didn't meet today because they're looking at the recording. So
Cool. That
Great.
sounds great.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Pleasure,
everyone.
guys.
Have a good afternoon.
Thanks for sharing, Owen.